Kia ora tātou. Welcome back, everybody. And we will recommence with item 9, which is around our adoption of elected and appointed members' expenses and allowances policy 2022. And we're on to the second amendment, which is around B, including childcare allowance up to and not exceeding $12,000 per annum. And that is brought to us by the Deputy Mayor and seconded by Councillor Hancock. Deputy Mayor, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Tēnā tātou. I believe that by supporting this motion, we're providing a mechanism of support for full participation of members with children. In addition, offering an allowance communicates to our colleagues, our staff and community that we want to remove barriers of full participation in council business or council work. Assumptions could be made that those who have children under the age of 14 years have no issues with childcare. I would argue that we cannot make such an assumption, but if we were to formalise the offer and support in a policy, that we strongly signal our council's active support of removing barriers to participation, full participation in council, thereby expanding diversity around the council table and giving voice to those people, to those many different voices that need to be heard. I believe we live in enlightened times and that this is an opportunity for us to support mothers and fathers of young children, of minors, and also to give, I suppose, body or feet to our values of manaakitanga and aroha. In Māori, there's a saying, ka hore hoki koia te aroha me te mātauranga. You can't have knowledge without compassion. And I think that this speaks to me of being compassionate to others. And having been the mother of 4 young children at a time, I was very fortunate because I had parents who were always available to look after them. But I know how hard and difficult it would be if I was still that young parent, being here and putting my hand up and saying, well, actually, that would be a great help. Now, we might have people who have young children who might not require that help or support. But I think that sort of, by formalising this, we actually are signalling something far greater, that we're taking a principled stance on offering support to those people who may well be marginalised and not able to enjoy the luxury that the rest of us have who don't have young children. Kia ora tātou.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. And thank you very much to the Deputy Mayor for raising this. And I suppose the addition here is really just about putting a cap on it. And of course, that really is in anticipation that there might be some resistance to this particular policy. But from my perspective, employers outside of council regularly provide this type of support to their workforce. As has been stated, it encourages participation across all levels of our community, and in particular members of the community who perhaps might be marginalised. It supports the principle of equality and equal employment opportunities, and we should view this as an enabler to support diversity in the chamber and participation, and we need to regard this as a contemporary decision that supports a forward-looking council. Those are my comments. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It was a question to the mover and seconder, if I could. How do you anticipate that? I'm assuming that's $12,000 per annum total, not per member, which it could be because the REM authority says $6,000 per child. How are you anticipating that would be administered? Would it be like first in, first served, or proportion to the amount of people with children who might claim?
Kia ora, Councillor Bowen. It would be, from my understanding, an acknowledgement and kept at the 12,000, regardless of the number of children someone might have, and that, yes, it would be available for them if they needed to attend a meeting as stated in the substantial. Kia ora.
Thank you. I don't think that quite answers the question, which is about how that would be worked out.
Yeah, sorry, the intention is that it is a cap of per elected member. So $12,000 per elected member. Say, for example, if they had more than two children, it would be capped at $12,000 for that particular elected member.
Could I suggest then you amend to say that then, because that wasn't clear to me? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen.
We're going to put that in. So it now reads include childcare allowance up to and not exceeding $12,000 per member per annum. Councillor Dennison online.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be speaking against this for many reasons, and I'll start with some of the arguments that are put forward to support it. One is to say that there's a cap. In actual fact, the most children we have on this current term is any one elected member has is 2. And in fact, that is the maximum of what somebody could claim up to. So the cap's kind of like this arbitrary notion of prudence, when I actually think it's notionally irrelevant for this term of council, because the maximum somebody could apply for is 12. And when we're talking about assumptions around somebody's need for childcare, I think there is a question, do they need it? One of the things we've just approved earlier is the salary base for a councillor has just increased over 7,000 from what was proposed on the original base, and even previous term of council, I believe, would be similar, around $7,000 extra for a base salary. So that, I think, would more than cover provision for care. The argument that it's regularly applied in the workforce as a notion to support employees with the full cost of childcare, or a maximum of $6,000 per child, I think I don't agree with that. I think a lot of employers don't cover that cost. And when we say it's not the employer, this case, that's covering the cost, it's actually our ratepayers that are covering the cost. And what this doesn't assume is that we're asking ratepayers who are already struggling with their rate bills to pay extra costs for some specific councillors to take advantage of this opportunity. I've used the calculation that when I had 4 young children over the time that I would have been here, on the basis of claiming $6,000 per child per year, I could have claimed, if it was a provision in my time, $234,000 over the years, a sum that I would describe as totally absurd. And so when you play this out as a precedent, maybe this term we might have 3 children that I'm aware of, next term we might have 10, and then so forth. It's just an unknown. And sure, we want to be encouraging people to stand, but in most cases, I'd say any other employment, any other provision in the part previous to being a councillor, there wouldn't be a subsidy for childcare. And the fact that it's not means tested, I think, is another downfall of this, to just presume that everyone needed it without actually having that kind of assessed, I think is a unfortunate situation. The last point I just wanted to make is, if this was to encourage more people to stand, we should have indicated this prior to the election and gave it a signal, rather than having it now as a outcome after the fact. I think is a little bit of a disappointment. And so my view remains clear. I don't think it's a provision that council should be applying. And certainly if this was to go through, I think there should be more parameters on it than just saying that they could have a carte blanche $6,000. I think there should be some protocols put in place that requires claims for paid childcare. So it's only required provision of receipts so that there is some accountability to it. Otherwise, I just think it's very loose, and I think it's very unfortunate the way it's been phrased in the recommendation. And those would be my points. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I also won't be supporting this recommendation just for a few reasons, similar to what has been outlined by Councillor Dennison. But in addition to that, I do believe there is a lack of will of our community for this to be paid. That was well demonstrated last time this was debated, and I think there was significant feedback from our community that I heard specifically and others heard where that demonstrated that there wasn't a will from our community. And I think any ratepayers' dollars that we decide to spend on something, particularly when it's unbudgeted, we do need to have that will of the community, really. In terms of childcare subsidies that are means tested across the board, that is available to all in our community through MSD, and I don't think being an elected member would be any different to anyone else in our community in terms of the access to that. So certainly I won't be supporting this.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you. I just want to thank Deputy Mayor and Councillor Hancock for bringing this matter up for debate. I myself, although could potentially benefit from this allowance, would not claim it and also would not support the amendment. My basis for that is that the government currently provides a universal subsidy for childcare for children over 3 years old, and that is not means tested, it is universal, but they also provide a number of other different childcare subsidies which are means tested. Particularly, there has been a freeze on the criteria for income for those subsidies. However, the government has just recently announced they will be extending that criteria, so it will apply to a substantially larger number of families would benefit from this from the 1st of April next year. So with that in mind, I feel like that it's a hard ask for our ratepayers to pay a subsidy on top of a subsidy when one is already being provided, in the context that we as local government are dealing with such a small portion of the total amount of public money. If the government, central government, are better equipped to provide subsidies to all families or as many families that would need it as possible. The purpose of those subsidies is to remove or mitigate barriers that parents as a whole face in managing their childcare obligations and their willingness or ability to work. And I really support that. So I really support the idea behind that if we can remove those barriers or encourage participation, then that's a good thing. In this case, however, I feel it was noted in the officer's report that expenses in this policy form part of the operational budget and as such are funded by ratepayers. For something like transport, I think it's easy to draw that line of this is an operational expense which facilitates the operations of council. I think it's a much harder line to draw to support childcare subsidy as a direct correlation to council business. I think that's all that I really wanted to say on that, except I just wanted to note with interest what the staff were saying earlier about having a benefit that could be applied to childcare if that's where they wanted it to go, and that's now been sort of subsumed and rolled into the general salary package. So it was good to see that there has been some facility made for the staff at PNCC, and that's not exactly explicit now, so I would also feel that would be an issue of fairness, that if it would apply to councillors and didn't apply to staff, I would sort of take issue with that. I think that wraps up my views on that. Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Most of my points have been covered. I will not support this. I'd like to commend the mover, understand where you're coming from, and absolutely support your views of where you're coming from with it. Why I don't support it is for a lot of the points that have already been made. Councillor Nader pointed out that the community, last time we've talked about this, the community do not support it, and it's their money we're spending. Secondly, it's been pointed out that we can get it in here, certain ones can get it in here, but not everybody out there can get it, and it's their money we're spending. So I think that's another. I just got to have a rethink on Councillor Hancock's view that lots of other employees do this. I have 8 children, all working in different levels of work. I'm not aware of any one of them that get support from their employees. So I would question that as to how many people do actually, other employees do support this. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rise to speak against the motion. I understand the intentions behind the intentions of the mover, and the seconder behind the motion. And I think it's something, I mean, you know, that's intended to do good. I myself have got a sister who's got a child, and sometimes I look after my nephew when she's not around. But just looking at unbudgeted costs and how much this will cost to ratepayers, I think is the reason why I'll probably move against this, number one. And number two, in as much as we're trying to remove barriers or trying to mitigate barriers to participation in the chamber or in doing a role, I do believe that the government does provide a number of childcare subsidies that helps families with the cost of preschool childcare or any other situation that a parent might find themselves in. So for those reasons, I'll be voting against this, and would encourage, not that I have children, but would encourage parents to go through the working income and social welfare system to benefit of the means tested or some of the support that our government or government assistance that central government gives in relation to child assistance. So for those reasons, I'll be voting against this motion. Thank you.
Right, back to the mover for a right of reply, Deputy Mayor. Okay, sorry, you've only just appeared.
Yeah, that was probably my fault for pressing the button. Thank you for your indulgence on that. In my 9 years on council, I've had somewhere between 1 and 3 children who would qualify for this all the time. And so I'm interested in this debate, although I have to say I haven't done the maths like Councillor Dennison, because the last debate exhausted my willingness for maths today, so I'm not doing any more adding up or dividing, which tends to be more the way it goes. So what I want to say is I very much appreciate the intention of enabling full participation around the table. I absolutely know from my personal experience that balancing childcare requirements, especially with some of the antisocial hours that are required by council, long days of meetings and functioned into the evening, are difficult for people with primary care responsibility. For me, I haven't supported a childcare allowance and will not support it today because it doesn't solve those problems for me. And I don't think increases the likelihood of people with primary care responsibilities standing for council, simply because of a point almost raised by Councillor Dennison, which is because allowances for the triennium are agreed at the beginning of the triennium, not going into the election process. So we have no way of signalling a commitment or intention toward the childcare allowance before an election campaign. Even if it was allowed now, there'll be no guarantee that that would continue into a following triennium, and so doesn't provide that support or certainty for people standing. But I think the biggest thing we can do to support full participation around the table is a theme that the Mayor has drawn out this morning in talking about our team approach. We all have ability to attend things in different ways, to participate around the table in different ways. And if we take a team approach to that, then that enables people to meet their personal and private commitments, as well as us to participate fully as council. We're one council with 16 different members, and if we all do our part, then that helps each of us to participate fully. So I won't support this. Thank you.
And now back to you, Deputy Mayor, for right of reply.
Tēnā koutou. Well, I think it was good to bring it here and have a robust discussion. I can tell everyone's got good heart for this, and probably the pragmatics of it is probably going to be see the defeat of it. However, I do want to sort of, by raising it, it highlights things. If I had my way, every parent throughout the country would get support, the support that they would need, and that varies with families. And I suppose also wanted to indicate that I wouldn't, for my mind, it would set a precedence too that we would want to support our staff in getting that same kind of access or support. And I know that that would be very problematic and wouldn't be able to, but it certainly was intended. Can I just come back and say, if we look at, it was mentioned about the base rate's gone up for councillors, and I must admit that I think that the base rate, that's not sufficient to cover the kind of childcare support that we would want in, people will have all kinds of pulls, their mortgages, their transport and so forth. So I think the pay rate is low for the councillors. We work on a high trust model, and in fact, people around the table here, I feel very confident, wouldn't be making application for the childcare allowance if they didn't genuinely require it. And we also, in discussion, Councillor Hancock and myself thought, yes, we understand the financial constraints on the council, hence the reason why looking for some way forward by saying, well, if we capped it at 12K, that would be up to 2 children, as per whatever the recommendation was at 6K. I think this was about being perhaps courageous, enough to say, hey, we've got people who've got children, young children, it'd be great to support them. I think the subsidies, they weren't there in my time, put it that way. I wasn't eligible for subsidies. And I'm pleased that come the 1st of April next year, there'll be even more of that being open. But I'm also mindful that next year there's an election. So with the swipe of a pen, things could change very quickly. I think the issue of fairness for staff, that certainly resonates with me as well. And I'd just like to say thank you for hearing that, and ngā mihi kia tātou. Kia ora.
All right, councillors, we have the amendment up there to include childcare allowance up to and not exceeding $12,000 per member per annum, and we will vote, please. And that has failed, 3 votes for and 13 against. Right. We move to the last of the amendments or additions, and that council will not reimburse for alcoholic beverages, and that's moved by Councillor Naylor, seconded by Councillor Wood. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. This was outlined on page 79 in our report as being something that was questioned by the Remuneration Authority, and for that reason, I know this has been debated at this table before, but for that reason, and also for the reason that I've never felt comfortable for the ratepayers reimbursing for alcohol, I thought it was worth putting on the table for discussion again. Certainly, I think as adults we all make the decisions about what we choose to eat and drink. However, I don't think I feel comfortable with ratepayers footing the bill for alcohol when it comes to that. So I would encourage you to consider that in terms of your vote.
All right. Councillor Wood is the seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Look, I know for the elected members who are returning here, this is a debate you've already had, but for the benefit of us 5 new members, I think it would be good to have this discussion again, certainly with a new term of council. We set the precedent earlier today, as we discussed, with Councillor Barrett's motion, that by incentivising something, by subsidising it, we provide incentive to do it. So if we provide a car parking exemption, we incentivise people to drive, just as if we provide free public or remuneration for public transport, we incentivise people to do that. So I think that precedent is pretty clear in this chamber here today. And so the question for me then comes down to a moral one. Do we want to incentivise, through ratepayer money, councillors to drink alcohol at council events? And look, I'm open to the debate. I'm looking forward to hearing different people's positions, but my reading of it and my personal position is, unless I can be swayed otherwise, that I would rather ratepayers weren't incentivising or providing that incentive for councillors to claim remuneration for alcoholic beverages. If you want to buy a glass of wine or a beer, we've had our remuneration debate. I know we're all getting paid for this job. You're welcome to pay for that yourself. If you want to have a glass of orange juice, a glass of apple juice, or whatever it may be, then council may have some scope in supporting that. But open to the debate, and I look forward to hearing all of your opinions.
Thank you, councillors. We've opened up a raft of comments. Look, I'm going to comment first because again, I just come back to our high trust model of what we do in expenses. I've been in this role 8 years, and on council for 9 and a bit, and I get issued with a credit card, and I can remember Steve coming to me and telling me this is what I need to do, and I said, "Thank you, Steve. I understand the protocols around it." And it's the same with this. If we withdraw this, and if I could just come back to, I see the expenses, and I would question whether we'd even get to $100. I know it's $100, but I would question whether we even get to that. So the amount of money. So this is really a political discussion, really, because it's not about quantum. But it would hinder the role of the Mayor's office and the council in a hosting sense. And I say that, and I'll give that some context. And my expenses are on public record, and it's captured through the sensitivity expenditure for transparency. But there hasn't actually been issues or public backlash on this. And it would stop some activity for city partners hosting of delegations. Our recent EU free trade talks and dinner with Rangitane and city partners would not have happened last week if this was in place. I don't think it's correct manakitanga to say, by the way, pay for your own, because I literally wouldn't be able to pay for it unless I'm going to pay for it all myself. And I don't think that's right that I should be doing that when I'm carrying out the role of ambassador for the city. Again, I just come back to it's that high trust, and why are we changing this now other than to make a political statement? I get that. I'm not trying to defend, I'm just trying to defend the ability to have a tool that can be used very occasionally. And majority of you around the table, you go to a conference, and I've been away with you occasionally, and I'd have to say, I don't even know if this is used, in essence. So look, I'm a little bit disappointed that nobody's actually come and spoke about the unforeseen consequences of this. It will hinder our relationships, or our ability to host people, I should say. Not our relationships, our ability to host people. So I would ask you to go back to the high trust model, and if there is a problem, bring it back to the table. But there has been no problems, and you will, there's unforeseen consequences in being able to host people correctly. That's all I'll say. So I won't be supporting this for all those reasons. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. And yeah, look, likewise, I'm not going to support this. In the last triennium, I think I probably, with meals, I probably had 2 wines, I think, and that was the entirety of my call on this particular part of our policy. I point out that an alcoholic drink can often cost the same as a non-alcoholic drink, so what is really the difference? I agree with the Mayor that this is really about us being involved with a high-trust model. We're all grown-ups. We can all make sound, rational decisions about what we eat or drink. And I suppose what we could actually add into the policy is that we could prohibit desserts with our meals. So just think about that. So thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would seek permission to ask a question that's only really become relevant with this amendment.
Sorry?
Would just ask permission to ask a question related to.
Sure.
Could I understand either from the mover or officers if we have any information about what the nature of the Remuneration Authority's comment or view was on this?
Well, I had a personal conversation with the chair, and she said to me, where did you get to on this? And I said, well, we voted to keep it in. When she said, look, lots of other councils don't have it. When I explained what it was, and the actual, she obviously didn't read it, but the actual conversation, she didn't agree or disagree. She just said that's up to you as elected members to, I think she said, you've just got to understand the scrutiny of that. So, yeah.
Mr Mayor, if I could also respond to the question, just to clarify, it might save a bit of time. The intent of this change is to make a change to the elected and appointed members' expenses and allowances policy. It is not intended to be giving direction to an organisation-wide policy, and my understanding that the budgets in the Mayor's office would not be affected by us changing elected and appointed members' expenses and allowance policy. So there's a significant difference, and I think perhaps some of the comments you've made may be mixing
I
this up.
disagree. I would be under the same policy as you.
That's not the intent of this
It
amendment.
might be the intent, it's the unforeseen consequence. So that's what it is. I would not be allowed to do anything in this space at all. So,
Clarification, Mr Mayor. Could we have that clarified by an officer? Because this is referring to meal expenses for council business outside of this of Palmerston North. It specifically says it's not for council business within Palmerston North City Council boundaries. So I'm really struggling to see how the examples you used will be covered by this. I'd just like some officer clarification if possible.
Through the Mayor, how this would work is that if the, even though the council may have been hosting an event, the Mayor's expenses associated with that event, if he would need to be, wouldn't be able to be reimbursed.
that's correct.
Yep.
Yes?
Could I ask a further question?
Yes?
When the Mayor's hosting events, is that not, those expenses usually covered by the Mayor's office rather than the personal credit card of the Mayor? Is what is my understanding. I think it's important that the differentiation of that is made clear.
Yeah, I think that through the Mayor again is that I think that probably is whether or not this resolution might need to be expanded further just to make that much clearer, because at the moment officers interpreting that would potentially see that any expenses that the Mayor might incur for alcoholic beverages at any event wouldn't be able to be reimbursed. Understand that it might be an event that is hosted by the organisation and therefore that is paid for out of a separate budget, but I think that there might create some, it might be just creating some ambiguity just around that aspect of it.
I'll keep going. There's a lot of you want to speak. So, Councillor McLeod.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak to this, but I mean, many of you would know that I don't drink for many reasons, primarily religious reasons. I mean, drink alcohol and that sort of thing. But I don't see any harm in a councillor attending an event or a conference and having dinner and deciding to eat their meal over a glass of wine or a beer or whatever the case might be, whatever your preference is. I think this is just, you know, it's becoming a little bit too political here, and I know what we're trying to do here. You know, we'll get good and great sound bites in the media and that sort of thing, but, you know, we're all adults here, and we can trust our own judgments and make sound decisions as elected members. I think last time I checked, we're all above the age of 18, and we can decide for ourselves when it's too much and when to control ourselves and that sort of thing. So I think, you know, there's nothing wrong with an elected member having a drink over a meal, whatever the drink might be and that sort of thing. So let's not politicize the issue, and I'll encourage, you know, fellow councillors to vote against this.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, and thanks for trying to clarify the ambiguity. Because as I was reading that, I could see myself attending a function, having to pay for my meal, which may have included a glass of wine, and then putting a claim into council to be reimbursed for that. That's the way I was reading this. But what I'm hearing is that if we were invited to attend a function hosted by an external party as council members, so we're on council business duty, and let's say M, for example, decided to purchase 15 tickets for all of us to attend, and included in those tickets was a glass of wine, how do we account for, or do we need to account for that glass of wine in terms of the council being reimbursed? So I was just trying to, and I've looked forward to the ambiguity being cleared up in terms of, is this about me going to a function and choosing to purchase a glass of wine that I can't claim it back through council on official council business, versus actual council events? Mr. Mayor, would you have to pay for all council events out of your own council budget? Don't know if that's clear, but it was just a bit confusing. Thank you.
Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Also not a drinker, but that's not the point. I won't be supporting this because I do think that I think councillors should be able to go to an event and that they should be able to claim for an alcoholic beverage going to an event because, as Councillor McLeod said, we are all adults and we should be able to get a drink at an event because we're adults to be able to do that. So I think that we've discussed this in the last term and debated it at length. Sorry for those councillors that weren't here, but we have done that, and I do think that we've gone round in circles, but I think that we should just not have this policy the way it is at the moment.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, for years I was a wowser, and well-known wowser, and I was probably the chief wowser in town because of my job and job description. I enjoy a glass of wine with a meal. In fact, my doctors asked me to have a glass of wine with my meal. My wife objects to me drinking Coca-Cola. So if you're going to say I'm not going to be reimbursed for my glass of Shiraz, perhaps people who drink Coca-Cola shouldn't be reimbursed for their Coca-Cola. I won't support this. One glass of wine and a meal, I do not see that as a major problem. Even as a wowser, I never voted for it.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I just think we need to be very clear what we're talking about here. No one's saying that an elected member can't have a glass of alcohol. What we're talking about is who pays for it. And I personally don't support ratepayers paying for our alcohol. So I understand that the intent of this proposal is that elected members, when at a conference or other meeting out of town, would not be able to be reimbursed for alcoholic beverages. And that I support. I think the Mayor is drawing quite a long bow to say that that would then apply to any meeting within Palmerston North boundary, because that's specifically not included in the expenses policy. So, sure, we can all make our decisions about what we drink, but I don't think ratepayers should be paying for alcohol, and so I'll be supporting this.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've learnt some new terms in this debate, so I'll have to go and look up a wowser to see what that is. Yeah, I've long voted against this, but I was convinced by the comment from the REM authority that we needed to look at it. Having said that, your comments, Mr Mayor, do concern me, and I do recognise the potential for impact on our hospitality as council here, which doesn't just happen inside the city. As the Mayor, you're often in that hosting situation, I know, at events that take place outside of the city. So that gives me significant pause for thought in this, because I absolutely agree, having heard the community feedback from the last time we had this debate, that the community do think it is a bit of a ask for them to pay for my gin and tonic. Although, you know, gin and tonic's about $16, so I'm feeling like that's a good spot I've landed in today with that one. So I can accept that in terms of our own personal expenses. But I am concerned about the impact on our ability and the impact of the Mayor's office being able to host. And I don't feel like I have enough information to make this decision at the moment. So, Mr Mayor, I don't know how if you intend to continue this, or if there's a way that this can be brought back to us with more information about how this affects your office.
I think I've made that really clear. I won't. We'll be stopping some stuff. That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Right, a reply back to you, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Certainly, as I've tried to point out, this amendment is specifically to the elected and appointed members' expense and allowance policy. And for those of you around the table who have seen the reporting on that, you'll know that is relatively small, and you'll know that that does not reflect the costs of events or the overall events that run out from the Mayor's office. So I do feel concerned that some of what has been said by the Mayor is clouding the situation. I certainly, I have asked for a little bit more clarity, and hopefully we'll get that at some point. I'm comfortable to progress this. If there ended up being unintended consequences, there's nothing to stop us from revisiting it. However, I think we need, this has come up, and I've brought it up here and put it on the table because the Remuneration Authority questioned it. I think that in itself is a good enough reason for, we're outliers. Other councils do not, many other councils do not reimburse for alcohol. And I think the public perception would confirm that position. And so I'm certainly happy to support this. This is a change for us at Palmerston North City Council. I don't think it would have significant negative consequences, and I certainly think we'd be better off for progressing this change.
All right. We will vote on C, please. And that has failed. 7 votes for and 8 against. Right, we've got a couple more that have been added in, more amendments. And this one is around the cost of taxis is included in clause 10. and this is again from Councillor Naylor and supported by, or seconded by Councillor Arnott. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just as was made clear during the question and answers, the cost of taxis is the only thing that's not currently reported on an annual basis to council. So this is really for the purpose of completeness, and it's also for the purpose of consistency. I think where we don't have consistency or completeness, we can run into the risk of adverse consequences. And just to demonstrate what I'm talking about here, currently, without this change in the policy, I can claim for a scooter ride home from my council meeting, and that would be reported annually to the committee. However, if I caught a taxi, that would not be reported. So it's just about consistency and completeness. So I'd urge you to support this.
Is there any other speakers to this? I'm just getting some advice that they're unsure if they can actually, staff are unsure of whether they can individually identify this down not only to individuals, but actually even into the elected members group, because there are some taxi cards within the organisation as well. We're unsure. So if this does succeed, there will need to be some level of understanding of how we can do this. I can tell you I've seen some figures around expenses, and we are talking really minimal numbers again. So I'll make a comment on that. I don't think we should. I mean, this again is quite political, and although if it was easy to do, we'd do it. But I just don't think it's. I really just think it's. We're talking about tin tax here. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to the mover and seconder for bringing this to our attention. I'm quite happy to support it. My view is that if there needs to be some administrative or some arrangement made with the provider to give us the data that we need to actually have accountability and transparency to the community for expenditure, then that's a subsequent conversation that should happen. But we at this table need to understand that this is first and foremost about what does it mean to be transparent and accountable around public money. Yes, it's a small sum, but it certainly fits well within the scope of the source of sums that are considered within this policy. So I'd urge you to support it on the basis as outlined by the mover. Thank you.
All right, back to you, Councillor, for any right of reply.
Thank you. I'm a little bit concerned, actually, to hear that it's not easy to be able to identify these, particularly when the Mayor has stated that it's very minimal. So where that information's coming from, if officers can't actually tell us how much it is we're spending on taxis, that is a little bit of an inconsistent
To individuals, Councillor, that's what I stated, to individuals.
So there's nothing in this clause that specifies it down to the individuals, but anyway, as I've pointed out, it's for completeness, it's for consistency. I think when we talk about a high trust model, we also, alongside that should be high accountability, and I think this supports that.
All right, we will vote, please. And that has passed 12 votes for and 3 against. All right, we go to the next, I think it's the final one. And this is around that official events is included in the definition of council business and deleted from the clause on tax expenditure. Councillor Bowen, and seconded by Councillor Michelard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This just came out of the questions to officers where, in questioning, I asked, there's a clause under tax expenditure that says when elected members are on official council business or at an official event, which seems to me to be unnecessary. Surely an official council business would include an official event, but the officer wasn't able to identify how those things might both be necessary, and I thought in order to tidy up, probably the simplest way of doing that is to lift official event into the definition of council business. I don't think there'd be any question that an official event would be council business, and so that would tidy up that clause that would just say you could claim for a taxi when elected members are on official council business, which would therefore include official events. I'm not trying to do anything else here.
Okay, can I ask a question? So, I think there is a difference between official events and council business, myself. Some overlap, definitely. But for instance, an official event might be, I don't know, an official arts event or official sports event, which the council's not involved in, that we haven't been invited to, but it is deemed an official event, and we trot off to that. Is that what we're talking about here?
It's certainly not what I'm talking about, Mr Mayor. I think if we're invited in our official capacity, then that's an official event, and if we're invited in our personal capacity, i.e. not through council, then that's not official business. I think we'd all be quite clear about that. But recognising that the checks and balances here are the officer delegation to accept whether a claim is appropriately made on official business or an official event, or any of the massive list of things that we call council business, that Hannah explained that in answering the questions, that that's her decision to decide whether it's in the definition, and failing that, that comes to the Mayor and CE. So it's not down to any individual member to determine, it's down to delegation.
All right, councillors, is there any other comments to this? There being none, I don't think you need to write a reply. All right, we'll vote on this. Thanks. And that is passed, 13 votes for and 2 against. All right, we're going back to the substantive now, which is around our full adoption of the elected and appointed members' expenses and allowance policy 2022. It resolves that Council approve the elected and appointed members' expenses and allowance policy 2022, attachment 1, to replace the elected and appointed members' expenses and allowance policy 2021, subject to the agreed amendments that we've just voted on individually. That 2, the Chief Executive be delegated authority to make minor edits to keep up to date the elected and appointed members' expenses and allowance policy 2022. That's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Are there any further comments to that? I've debated that well. Okay, we vote. It's passed, 15 votes for and none against. Right, we will move now to number 10 and invite Steve Patterson, who's been waiting patiently there as our finance manager, around the Palmerston North Airport Limited Statement of Expectations 2023-24 and 25-26 years. Steve, page 95 of our papers.
Mr Mayor and councillors, good afternoon. A statement of intent, a statement of expectation is part of the accountability cycle, as you may probably aware, for organisations such as our CCOs. A statement of expectations followed by a statement of intent, and then the reporting through the interim and final reports of those entities is the accountability cycle. the previous council in early October decided to roll over the statements of expectation for the other CCOs. And I thought about doing this for the airport as well, but at the time felt it was probably better to wait till we heard the outcomes of their annual report from last year, which we did a couple of weeks ago, and also that I felt it was necessary to incorporate some changes that particularly made reference to the line of credit facility that the council and the company have entered into, that facility arrangement. So I've drafted this proposed statement of expectations for you for the company. In reality, it's little changed from last year, apart from the section which refers to the line of credit. There are a couple of changes that I need to identify for you, though, following your decisions earlier today about committee structures and the timing of those and their delegation. So I'd made reference in here in a couple of places to a planning and finance committee, which was a phrase that was thrown around about the time I was writing this. I understand now from your terms of reference, in fact, this organisation will be reporting through to the Economic Growth Committee, so I'd be changing the references in the 3 or 4 places to that committee's name, and also take out any inference that the recommendations from that committee would then go on to the council, because the committees themselves will have delegated authority to endorse those statements of intent. So with those minor changes, that's what I'm now proposing. In terms of one other comment, I guess it's important to acknowledge, and we'll see this, I think, when we receive their statement of intent in February, that they as a company face significant challenges going forward in terms of the capital that's going to be required to fund the work that they need to do there. And even with the facility that we're providing for them. So I guess this statement of intent, or statement of expectation, acknowledges that in a sense that they will be encouraged to look for ways of having relationships that can help bring money to the table for them to fund those developments. That's all for me.
Thank you, Steve. Number of questions. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Steve. Last week, when the airport paper came to us, we had a little bit of discussion about when might be the appropriate time for the dividend to be reinstated. And a number of elected members indicated some level of appetite to see that perhaps reinstated sooner than what's been outlined to date. If council was to have the view that they wished to see that dividend reinstated, would this process of determining the statement of expectations be a good time to indicate that view?
Yeah, well, it's certainly mentioned in here as part of, and would be the place that it would be outlined, yes, if that was that expectation. I think I suggested to you a couple of weeks ago that it was my personal opinion that we, and I guess half-pie alluded to this a couple of moments ago, that the big challenge for us and them is going to be the capital that's going to be required to undertake the work they need to do. And so the council will need to have to think seriously about the trade-offs there are in terms of whether a dividend's payable and whether or not the council needs to put more capital into the company. And we've made no provisions at this stage for making any significant capital injections into the company, and in fact we're not even signalling that we're prepared to do that in this statement of expectations at this point. So it's quite rightly a council decision about what their expectations are, but I guess my suggestion to you is that any suggestions of a dividend payment are, I think, unrealistic at this point, and certainly in the short term. Longer term, I'd think yes, because that's the nature upon which we set the company up, wanting to see that would be dividend payments to reflect those things. But
So just further to that, just to clarify, in the section 3, bullet point 2, the airport as a commercial entity, the wording at the bottom of that first paragraph is that in the long term may require dividend payments to be suspended in the short term. So that statement is giving some direction. If council is wishing to see some consideration of that dividend being reinstated, would we need to change that wording in the statement of intent to reflect that?
if you were positively seeking from them a proposal that they would incorporate in what they presented to us a dividend payment, yes, I think that should be reflected in that statement.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Steve. My questions are about the dividend as well. Just checking that I've remembered the sort of sequence of things correctly. So, is it correct that the initial justification for suspending the dividend was the downturn of income due to the COVID pandemic?
There was actually a discussion on a couple of fronts. One was about the terminal program and that development, and their presentation to us that they requested that they be able to reinvest any income that they generated back into that and other proposals in order for things to happen. But then the COVID came along and interrupted as well, because we had to change their statement of intent that year, and that reinforced the fact that they wouldn't be paying a dividend, because the directors have to sign off, obviously, before any dividends paid, that the company is capable of doing that. And so the initial one was in relation to the proposal to do the terminal development, and then the COVID came along after that and reinforced that as well.
Okay, that wasn't my memory of it, so that's interesting. In terms of the sort of loan facility that we are advancing on behalf of the airport, if you know what I mean, we're the kind of intermediary for, do you envisage that will need to be increased? When you're talking about we might need to pay capital into the company, is that in terms of we might need to take on more of that sort of intermediary debt, or is that in terms of actually us raising money through debt to pay into the company? I wasn't quite clear what you were talking about there.
Yes, well, I guess there's two different possible outcomes there. One would be in relation to how much debt the company itself is able to raise, and it's raising it through us in terms of that facility. So we did talk about reviewing, having the ability to review that level each year as part of the process of considering their statement of intent. But also, in my mind, there is an associated issue about what's the appropriate debt equity ratios and things for the company to operate. And in that sense, it could be that further capital in the company might be something that would be required at some point. We haven't, it's quite some years since we felt the need, or they requested that we consider that, but, and we've kept that off the table for a long time now, but looking forward to the commitments that they have in order to achieve the things that we're looking for them for. That's part of what we would need to consider as well.
Okay, so when we look at those two things, the dividend, again, from my recollection, was between perhaps 600,000, 800,000 a year. Is that about right? Yeah. And the debt facility that we're being an intermediary for is 50 million, isn't it?
At the moment, we've said as a maximum of 50 million for the sum to be raised through the council, yes.
So I'm not understanding the argument that they need to reinvest the dividend because of the capital expenditure, because when you look at the size of the dividend versus the size of the debt that they might need to raise, it just seems to be that the dividend in terms of its magnitude is neither here nor there in terms of that.
Well, in a sense, it's not here or there in the big scheme of things, I suppose, although it's probably more efficient for them and us for them to have the money reinvested on our behalf in the development of the company than it is to be paid through the council and then have to be put back again to them. At least that's the way I see it. It's been my view along the way that we should be trying to obtain dividends for the company, because that's part of a discipline that we would expect in terms of running in a commercial environment. Airport companies, though, have not been huge payers of dividends in terms of cash dividends, and a lot of them around the countryside wouldn't be paying dividends. The councils have, in fact, put much more capital in to have a higher level of capital investment than what we've found the need to do, or we've been able to survive to do. And the company's operated in what I think is an appropriate way to do that. My personal feeling is that long term we should be having an environment which we're continually saying expects there to be consideration of whether or not there's a dividend, and that a dividend should be something that we would have as part of our operating arrangements with them. But I think personally that the realities of what they face now and what we face going forward are that they would be better off for the city to be reinvesting the dividends back in the company to achieve the things that we are looking for them to achieve.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Isabella.
Thank you. I have a question for you. I'm on page 101, just on points number 4, which is the expectations around environmental impacts, and the following point 5 on operational capacity. Have you got that there? Cool. So I just had a concern or a query, I guess, as to your view on whether or not these two expectations are in conflict in any way. And the reason I ask is I noted that under environmental impacts, the goal is to achieve a 30% reduction in greenhouse emissions from the 2018 baseline by 2031. And I know that there's, is it 7.8% that's already been reduced to achieve level 2, and that there is a goal of net zero emissions target by 2035, whereas the operational capacity expectation is looking at a 24/7 airfield operation to facilitate sustainable growth. So I'm just sort of wondering whether that expectation of at once growth but also achieving a net zero is in conflict, and sort of it comes off a question that I asked at the previous meeting, which was when the offsetting sort of program would occur, and the answer there was that that would occur after 2035. So I was just curious about the pathway to achieving both of those expectations.
I'd have to say I'm not an expert in this field, but my judgment is that one of the strengths of our airport in terms of what we see it as a gateway and as an operating environment for us as a city is the 24/7 operating arrangements. And so we've been doing all we can to protect that and see that as a real strength of our airport. So I'd be guessing then that if that's something that we deem to be really important in terms of the way in which that facility operates, then we'd be expecting them to try to operate in that sense and provide that service, but still try to reduce the impacts on the environment in the way in which they do it, and to comply with our direction in terms of what we're setting as our sustainability goals as the council. So I don't see them totally in conflict at all, really. I think they can work alongside one another, and it's just the way they operate to achieve their service.
And Councillor, if I could just add, because I mean I represent the council with some of the users, Massey, Aviation, Air New Zealand, and to a lesser extent Origin. But I know Air New Zealand with their biofuels program is really ramping up. In fact, I think they've that they've started that rollout on some of the main trunk lines. Unsure whether it's coming to Palmerston North yet. The second thing is around their aircraft and their future planning around aircraft. And they've signalled quite clearly that there will be some electric aircraft for smaller routes. And the final thing is around Massey Aviation and how they do things themselves there. So I think I was actually quite buoyed what the airport were doing in the sustainability space. The challenge was put to them, and as Steve said, they're trying very hard to work within those parameters as well as growing the pie as well. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As a new elected member, I'm struggling a bit with this discussion because I know very little about what this terminal redevelopment is that everybody keeps talking about. It wasn't in the annual report, or there was, unless I've missed it, there was very little in the annual report about what's actually being done. I can't find any resource online for it. Possibly a question I should have asked prior to this meeting, but do you have any, could you explain for the benefit of the new elected members what the redevelopment is, given they've already done the new conveyor belt, they've added the new lounge, and they've been redeveloping the terminal for the last 5 years. So are we talking an aesthetic redevelopment or something they're required to do?
They have a very significant program of redevelopment that's a multi-million-dollar one that they've shared with us in their statement of intent material, and they've got consultants sort of working through that with them. It's designed to position the airport for the future for what are possible expectations in terms of the way in which scanning and all that sort of stuff's done at the airport, the capacity to handle the scale of what's proposed in terms of future growth. And there are a range of things in the current building that, although they did install a new operating, lift, the escalator recently, it doesn't mean to say that the building itself is fit for purpose as it stands for the moment, certainly not into the future. So the company's challenged particularly to find a way through that. And they have, as I said, brought to that proposal to the council in the past, and it does form a significant part of the current year's statement of intent, that if you have a browse at that, you'll see reference to that.
Thank you, that helps, and perhaps we could have, for particularly the new members, that information Councillor Steve sent to us so we can review it.
Sorry,
my suggestion is in relation to that you'll see an updated version of all that in the material you get in February when you get the statement of intent stuff from that. It'll give a much better picture of...
Yeah, and there is, just for the councillors' benefit, there will be, I mean, Steve has outlined those things well, there will be a visit to the airport campus to have a look at that. We just didn't get that into the program yesterday, so apologies on that, but you will get that benefit, and everything that Steve highlighted was correct.
Thank you. And a follow-up question then. So I'd like to sort of delve a bit deeper into Councillor Johnson's line of questioning around, you say that they aren't able to afford their capital projects that they've budgeted for if they have to pay a dividend to their shareholder. I struggle with that concept a little bit, that the airport is able to budget for a capital project that they can't afford, and we should expect to foot the bill without question. So my question to you really is, it's possibly a question better for the airport officials, but is there scope for them to reduce their capital spend to fit within their budget?
Well, that's exactly what they're looking at the moment, is they're trying to right size and scope the project program that they've got ahead of them to fit within the capacity that they have to fund it, really. And it's important for the council to remember as well that in terms of this facility that we've put in place, for it to stand the test, the company has to be capable of operating at a profit. Otherwise, the facility that we have will be treated as borrowings of the council in terms of our source of funds, and will impact on what we can borrow for other things. So it is really important that that the company works hard on positioning themselves to operate as a successful, profitable entity, but at the same time we have expectations of them as well that we've discussed in this chamber often about the development of their land, about growing other users there to widen their base of revenue, to make sure that it operates as a facility that will enable them to provide the services that we expect as a city in and out of here, and to compete, I suppose, in the regional network of where there has been quite a lot of development in some of the other centres.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right. Look, thank you, Steve. That's the question's done. And we have the two resolutions there that Council received the memorandum titled Palmerston North Airport Limited Statement of Expectations 2023-24, 25-26, presented to Council on 16th November 2022. And that Statement of Expectations for Palmerston North Airport Limited 2023-24 to 2025-26 be adopted. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And look, I'll just open up and saying, look, thank you, Steve, for there's clearly some members are more up to speed with this, and I appreciate, than others. I just want to go back to why we have an airport and why we own one. It is a strategic partner for us. It is a gateway for the wider region. If we didn't have an airport, just have a think about that. You know, as an inland city, although we might have rail and road, if we didn't have air connections, well, I'd pick there would be some people that weren't here. It's also part of our, arguably our number one strategy around the distribution hub at Te Tanganui and connecting all those dots. The airport is a critical player in that, along with intermodal and also carbon reductions of rail and a more efficient road network. Look, there's been some discussions about the work, and they're going to have to come to us about what that work looks like going forward. I think they've been caught in a timing is everything, and cost escalations, having to do new terminal work. I mean, some of the things that Councillor Wood spoke about, you know, we're talking there around airside security screening. We've fallen behind, let's be honest. Jet capability. We have one of the strongest regional routes in New Zealand, which is Palmerston North Auckland, and I think number 4 in the country is Christchurch to Palmerston North. So we're really well connected. There's some different fuel opportunities around biofuels. There's also the baggage handling, and all of that needs to be upgraded. We fall into the category of perhaps not being, we'll always be compliant, but certainly the customer experience will be different. And also where the air freight and the air training and all that sort of goes, and the opportunities, future opportunities there. All regional councils that have regionally based airports have stumped up significantly, i.e. councils have provided more capital. Rotorua, Nelson, New Plymouth, Hawke's Bay, and in some cases a lot. So if you take a macro view of this, and I know there's been some, and rightly so, about the dividend, but in the smaller scheme of things, it's just a matter of do they pay it now? It's sort of Peter paying Paul, or do we pay it back to them in a bigger lump sum with a whole lot of capital injection? And I understand, you know, medium term to long term, absolutely they need to pay a dividend. But at the moment, I believe, and that needs to be proved to some of the councillors that perhaps aren't that clear on it, do they what they need to do with that dividend. So I just want to clarify, we've got to be, this is a strategic asset, and we just need to be mindful of the macro view of what they are trying to do. So thank you, Steve, for the adoption. I'm sure that we can review the dividend on an annual basis, and we just need to understand that there's a lot going on in that space. All right, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I just wanted to speak to the airport as a commercial entity, and thank you for pointing out I too am probably less educated in this discussion. But what I can hear from my councillor colleagues today is that the dividend that we signalled we had an appetite for 2 weeks ago has been parked to one side. I completely understand the vital importance of an airport terminal as part of Palmerston North City's business growth. I completely understand and agree with the terminal redevelopment. Where I'm getting a little bit cloudy is other developments that are taking place in and around, if not on the airport land, that are perhaps require lots of capital investment, and the line of credit to the tune of $50 million is also parking that dividend of $890,000 aside. The opportunity for development needs to be in place, and there's lots of things going on, as you've quite rightly pointed out with Tutanganui, Mr Mayor. But there are other ways to achieve perhaps a dividend back to the shareholders, whilst also looking at other ways to maintain the terminal redevelopment. I'm speaking to the Ruapehu Park development on the sale of those subdivisions. One of the opportunities that's in front of us is perhaps looking at shared partnerships in that development so we can still bring a dividend back to our ratepayer shareholders. Looking at the language in that, growing long-term shareholder value, well, the shareholders are our ratepayers, as we all know. Investment in critical infrastructure, including terminal redevelopment, that's going to be ongoing, improving customer experience, and that's be interesting to understand how many of those customers are our ratepayers and how many are visiting our city, but also bringing some investment into the city as well. Income diversification and value accretion benefits, i.e. the Utanganui development in front of us. I'm just looking at that Ruapehu Business Park and thinking, yes, whilst we're growing the asset for the city and for the airport as a company, I don't want to step away from that it is running as a business, and the shareholders who are our ratepayers are the ones that are putting aside their need for some support within our communities. So, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I agree with the Mayor's comments in terms of the strategic benefit the airport has to our community, and we're very fortunate. And it was also really positive to hear from the airport last week in terms of the fact that passenger numbers are recovering and bouncing back sooner than what they had originally forecast. That's really positive. In terms of the decisions that we need to make, this is, I understand, the first step in a number of steps in the process where there's a bit of back and forth where we indicate our expectations, they come back to us with a draft, and then there's further discussion prior to that being confirmed. But my view is slightly different to perhaps the officer's view, who's expressed that he believes it's better off to reinvest back into the company than providing that dividend to ratepayers. I think that whilst it was appropriate to suspend that during the acute COVID environment, my view is that I would like to see that reinstated sooner than what's been currently flagged. Part of this document I really support, and that's on page 100, where it outlines that Council expects PNAL to maintain suitable prudent risk policies, a balance sheet with a prudent debt equity ratio, a profitable trading position, and to be able to fund future renewals and growth activity without recourse to additional shareholder capital. I'm really interested in seeing a model come back from PNAL that is not so tight that a $600,000 or $800,000 dividend to its shareholders is going to break that financial model. I think that we need to communicate, if that is an expectation that we have, that we'd like to see that reinstated, I think we need to indicate that at the earliest possible time, and I think that is now. So I'm happy to move an amendment to recommendation 2, that's subject to, I have given the officers the wording, it's subject to, I did write it down, sorry.
It's on the
as
screen.
amended to reflect.
It's on the screen.
As amended to reflect the expectation that dividend payments are reinstated within the next 2 years. The consideration around us perhaps needing to provide further borrowings to them if they pay us the dividend, I think we do need to have an understanding of the impact of a dividend to our ratepayers versus us providing borrowings. And the dividend does actually provide cash to our operational expenses. This is my understanding, and certainly I hope someone will correct me if I'm wrong. Borrowings, however, do have less significant impact on the cash balance in any given year. So I think if the financial model is such that it requires them to give no financial return to the stakeholder, then I'm actually concerned that perhaps it doesn't stack up to being an appropriate model to progress with. So I think this is the beginning of a conversation. This is about them coming back and us having further dialogue. So I'm not saying that in supporting this amendment, that means that everything is set in concrete today, but it does give them, communicates to them what our actual expectations are. And whilst there has been some discussion, and I'm sure it won't be a unanimous view today, I think it's worthy of our discussion to see if we've got a collective view, or at least a majority view, to communicate that with them at this stage. So I'd encourage you to consider that.
All right. Councillor Wood, you're the seconder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for your clarification around what that capital spend is going to look like. That really helps advise my thinking. The key question with the dividend is who should be making the decision about the capital investment that the airport is planning on making, and who should make the decision about the capital injection necessary for them to undertake their developments. And frankly, I think I expressed it last week. At the end of the day, our role as a council is to weigh up decisions in the best interests of the ratepayers and the best interests of our community. So if the airport in no way is asking for a dividend saying we don't want them to undertake their capital investment program, what it is saying is that we expect them to pay a dividend to their shareholder and to the ratepayers who own the company, and that if they have capital projects they want to undertake, that will need to come to the council. We'll need to approve the injection needed to make it happen, which is quite possibly what would need to happen anyway. So I don't agree with the argument that simply leaving an extra $400,000 into the airport each year is suddenly going to mean they won't need any extra capital funding or support from council. And if that was the case, and that if we left the dividend in, they wouldn't need to come to us for any funding, then I disagree with that in principle. I think they should, and are duty bound by the ratepayers, to put their proposal up against the many and varied struggles for funding we have in our organisation, the different needs of our community, and it should be weighed up and the decision should be made in that light. If it is projects, for example, for necessary CCA upgrades that have to happen for the airport to continue to operate, I have 100% confidence that this council would support the work needed to do that. If they're proposing upgrades simply that are aesthetic, like what we've seen with Rotorua, Hawke's Bay, Nelson, then perhaps now is not the time in an immediate post-COVID environment to be making those aesthetic upgrades. What we need at the moment is functional, not necessarily sexy. And so that's my view on it. One of the things I'd like to flag here now for our discussion later on in the year around our statements of intent is that we don't have to immediately go back to a 40% dividend on any revenue that the airport makes. We could scale it. We could say, right, we'll have 10% next year, we'll have 20% the year after, 30% after that, and 40% after that, so that we scale that dividend back into their budgeting. There is no reason that we have to simply jump back to that, because I fully respect in the post-COVID environment there is that difficulty in rebuilding, and it would potentially have some negative impacts if we jump back to 40%. I'd like to flag the point that in 2012, 13, 14, where they were making comparable net surpluses after tax, they were able to afford dividends and paid to the company. So the argument that they simply can't afford it, I'm not convinced. And if they have put forward a capital project or capital program that they cannot afford within the restraints of their budget, then I don't think that is fiscally responsible, and I think it should come to the council to gain that additional capital that's needed to undertake the project. So on all angles of this argument, I think it would be sensible, it would be in the best interest of the ratepayers, and it would be in the best interest of our community for those decisions to be made at this council table and for the dividend to be reinstated.
Look, councillors, as with some other 11th hour and last minute amendments, I'm not going to support this, and I'll give you a couple of reasons why. I'm nervous about having this sort of discussion without we employ a skills-based arm's length board to make some decisions around the airport, and now we've got councillors in the weeds of it all. if we're going to want the dividend back, we need them in the room to understand what the unforeseen consequences are here. Look, there's been a number of statements there from a councillor. Look, please, the dividends and the trading environment now are way different to 2013-14 when there was multiple airlines flying into the place. It's quite different now. I just come back to that macro view. We've got to understand what are they trying to do. And clearly, they haven't, I get it, but some don't, they haven't put the value proposition of what they're doing. And it is clear because there's more than one or two of you asking the question. But I would prefer to have that discussion and you be informed with the airport board around in the room. I do not want to have this discussion say, you shall pay a dividend back, and there's a whole lot of other stuff in the background around them having to pay more money to borrow that money, arguably from us, which makes it really dumb to have the money to pay Peter, from Paul to pay Peter. It just doesn't add up. But we don't know that, and I don't understand all of that either myself. But I would like us to have a bit more informed. This will have unforeseen consequences. I get that you want the dividend back, and I can understand the reasons why. But please, let's do this discussion with an informed view. At the moment, you haven't got an informed view, and this will be just totally some councillors will have a better understanding than others, and some councillors have some very set views on what's going on here. I've got to be clear, this is a strategic partner of ours, and if we hamstring them, there will be some consequences. So let's understand what that is first before we jump into asking them to pay back things straight away. If it's the view of the majority of the council we do that, I'd like to do that with all the views in the room, including our employed skill-based board for the airport. Councillor Isabella.
Thank you. This was not related to the amendment, however. Is that?
Sorry?
This was not related to the proposed amendment, though, is that?
Oh, okay. Right. We'll park that, please, and we'll come back to you. Councillor Johnson.
I do support the amendment, and I have a few points to make. The first one is that I have been around this table for quite a number of years, and I do think it's not helpful for us not to respect views that are expressed by new councillors. New councillors bring a new look to things, they bring a fresh pair of eyes, and I think it's important that we listen and respect new views that are expressed around the table rather than dismissing them. So it does make me feel uncomfortable when I hear those kind of, you don't really understand it sort of arguments. I think that that's a little unfair, perhaps. In terms of the dividend, I think it's very important to remember that the dividend enables us to reduce rates. I understand that by paying the dividend into their capital expenditure that they're building up equity in the company for years to come. But actually, I'm pretty certain that if we asked our ratepayers, the current cost of living crisis would be much more important to them today for their rates than building up equity into the airport company for years to come. I'm just not buying this argument that if we anticipate a dividend in the next 2 years, that it will somehow cripple the company. I'm not buying that. And secondly, we have extended a line of credit of $50 million for the capital projects. A dividend of $400,000, $600,000, $800,000 is not going to cripple those capital projects. So I do think it's time for a bit of pushback. It's definitely time. Here's the opportunity. We put forward our statement of expectations. It's then up to the airport to come back to tell us what they think the consequences of that might be before the final is agreed. And so this is the appropriate time. It's certainly not an 11th hour amendment. When the airport company came to the chamber in the last couple of weeks, many councillors expressed concern about the lack of a dividend, and there were lots of questions about that. And I think the airport company would be surprised not to see something about the dividend in the statement of expectations. So I do think, any kind of hyperbole about how this is going to sink the company is a little premature. I think at this stage, we should be putting this in the statement of expectations and waiting to see what response we get from the airport company.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I wasn't going to comment just at this point in time, just to ask a question and perhaps get a comment from Steve. And it was something which you said that's triggered this. Really, we really need some sort of qualified view, I guess, of how this particular amendment might affect the airport company in terms of their forward planning. And I'm thinking really around sort of their ability to be able to plan from a sound foundation. So I'd like some comment on that, please. That would be helpful. Thank you.
I think on reflection, including something like this as a council expectation in the statement won't have dire consequences at this point, in my view. It signals something that I've said all along, is that we're looking for having dividends, and it already reflects the fact that we're expecting dividends, but looking for them to perhaps recognising they'll be deferred. So from my perspective, if something like this were added, the company's response then in preparing their statement will be to say, well, we can see here the council are looking to want to have a dividend. That's no surprise to us. That's what they've always wanted. What are the implications for us? If the implications are that that's not something that's achievable, that they can tell us that when they bring back their statement of intent. So I suspect that, that adding a comment a bit like this at least signals the longer term, and that we've put a time frame on it, then they can have their discussions in the light of that, and as I said, make their argument back to us in February, March.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Can you just while you're there, so some of the capital investment that they need to do is to actually meet CAA requirements. I just really want, I'm a little bit sort of uncertain about whether or not that might impact on the level of work that they need to do to make sure that we actually meet those yes. requirements.
Well, obviously at the moment they're partway through the current year and they've got a capital program that they're considering, and part of what they're doing in the current year is trying to plan, to revise the plans that they had about the terminal and the other developments that they're doing, and they're trying to develop as we've asked them to do, their commercial developments, and they explained to us the other day when they were here about their approach for that, how they were looking to get partners to be able to build some of those facilities and long-term leases and the like. So that's their strategy. So for us, for them, the challenge is what's the latest updated information they have about what they can what they need, what they can produce, what their business case is, and that will be part of what they bring back to us, because as well in our assessment of their statement of intent, we've said in giving them the loan facility that their projections and their business cases that they build into that statement will be part of the judgment that we make in terms of whether we're prepared to continue to provide the advances that facility offers. So I think they've got a lot of. I believe they've got a lot of challenges ahead. The onus is on them to bring back those challenges to us and to share them with us as part of the debate that we have with them in relation to their draft statement. And so we then will give you advice about that when we see them and have robust discussions with them, in my view.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Dennison, online.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I, as mentioned last week's meeting when we had this as a topic of discussion, I'm quite confident and comfortable around the approach that we've taken with the airport board, and to be backstepping on this at this stage, I just feel really unfortunate. It's clear that they have quite a large-scale strategic investment that they're planning to make, and it's unfortunate there's many members, the new members, haven't been brought up to speed just yet on their plans and the need for it. So notwithstanding that, I think we need to follow through on our original position and go with the combination of the borrowing approach, but also the reinvesting approach, which is not taking the dividend, and keep the airport board in the strongest position they possibly can. So I'm comfortable and very confident in the way that we're heading down this path. And until we get in the room together and get everyone up to speed with the actual overall objective of what's been planned here, then we can maybe reconsider and maybe have a re-engage in this type of conversation. But for now, I think we need to hold our approach. And as the major shareholder, or the only shareholder, I think it's wise for us to put the airport board in the strongest position possible moving forward into this larger scale project. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Colleagues will remember from, or potentially, can't remember when we had it, remember from the debates about our other CCOs that the statement of expectation is not a requirement for council to participate in. The Local Government Act says that the shareholder may provide a statement of expectation. It's simply an opportunity for the governing body to provide direction towards the company's consideration of their statement of intent. The statement of intent is where the rubber hits the road. So I feel that it would be remiss of us to not reflect this conversation in that statement of expectation. We're talking about it, and we'll see if there's a majority view towards this, but it sets no requirements for our airport board apart from to consider this in their statement of intent, and as the officer said, to come back to us with their reflections on that. And their reflection may well be that that's impossible for reasons explained, or it might be, as Councillor Wood suggested, that there's a route towards it, or it might be that this is fine. We don't know that at the moment. I think we started that conversation with the airport board in this chamber, but we haven't explored that with them yet. What this signals is that that's a conversation we intend to have, and I think this is a sensible step in this stage of the process, which, remember, is statement of expectation, followed by statement of intent, followed by six-monthly report, followed by annual report, and so it rolls on. We continue to have this conversation with our airport board. This is not once and done. This is the beginning of this part of the conversation, which sits within the broader context of the ongoing support of this very important strategic asset, as the Mayor's reflected. So I absolutely would encourage us to support this amendment. It sits for me clearly within what the officer expressed as the commercial expectation of returning a dividend. That's a reasonable expectation of a commercial entity, and sits within their requirement to be profitable in order to be able to access that line of credit. If they can't demonstrate that requirement, then we are not doing them a service at all by not having this conversation. So we need to have this conversation now. Thank you.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Interesting listening to the debate and the way it's gone around the room. I will be voting against this, similar to the lines of what Councillor Dennison has said. So I just feel that we did lend the airport the money in the last term, and I just think that we've got to give them a chance to do the work that they wanted to do, and I think giving them this signal is not the right signal at the moment. So I personally feel that we shouldn't be giving them this signal to give us the dividend back at the moment. I don't think it's the right signal to give to the airport board. So my view is not to give them this, so I'll be voting against the amendment.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to acknowledge and appreciate the mover of this amendment and the officer's additional comment in response to Councillor Hancock's questions. I thought those were both quite helpful in informing my views, and having listened to the debate, quite comfortable actually that we do proceed in this direction as along the lines Councillor Bowen has just outlined. My personal view has been that, you know, the holiday, the dividend holiday has really been only ever a very short-term thing, but we we're running the risk of kind of getting into kicking the can down the road kind of mode and just saying, well, we'll think about it in a year's time, we'll think about it in a year's time. One of the great things about this recommendation is it actually sets a 2-year frame, so there is plenty of time for us to actually find where we should sit, because yes, there will be some impacts anytime there is a dividend required. And what I would hope is, if this recommendation is successful today, that when we start having that conversation about impacts, it is the whole conversation about impacts and not just the conversation about the impacts on one company. We need to think about the impacts on the community if we are going to forego a significant amount of revenue when we continue to face downwards pressure on rates. So we need to make sure that that conversation is complete if and when it does eventuate. Mr. Mayor.
All right, right, a reply. Back to you, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, colleagues. It's been a really valuable discussion. I think, you know, the point that Councillor Johnson made about the needs of our community in the current cost of living crisis being more significant than the needs of us increasing equity in the airport is a particularly relevant point in terms of the current environment in which we make decisions. I just also want to speak to the reservations that have been expressed by the Mayor in terms of our ongoing relationship with the airport. I think in any healthy relationship that clear communication and outlining clear expectations is a really important part of that. And I think this discussion today, we will form a collective view so that we can be clear in our expectations to them. I think the purpose of this paper is for us to outline our expectations. If the, as the Mayor has said, what if there are unforeseen circumstances? It would be better if the Airport Board were here. Those discussions are all a part of the ongoing process. We will hear any concerns that they might have, if they have concerns, early next year when they come back with their statement of intent. But I think at this point, it's really appropriate for us to set our expectations clearly, and I hope you do support a direction to move back to a dividend on behalf of the shareholder, which is our ratepayers.
All right, thank you. We will now vote on the amendment. And that is passed, 12 votes for and 4 against. All right, we'll go back to the substantive. All right, so I'm not going to repeat those, just to say that we've added as adopted, be adopted as amended around the statement of expectations. And we've got both resolutions there. Any other comments? There being none, we will vote on the substantive, please. And that has passed, 16 votes for and none against. All right, we'll move through to number 11 is our Treasury report, 3 months ending 30 September 2022. Again, our Finance Manager, Steve, to present this. Page 103, councillors, of your papers.
Mr Mayor, councillors, in normal times we have a sort of reporting regime which is quarterly in terms of the financial reporting and the performance reporting of the whole of the organisation. And because for a range of reasons, the first quarterly report for this year is actually going to be a 4-month report, and you'll receive that soon in terms of the feedback that you get. I decided to just stick with this Treasury report, which is a standalone report, to be for the quarter, and to send it through to you. It's for your information, really, but I'd like to make just a couple of quick points to help those who are new to the process to hopefully understand it a bit better. In terms of the Treasury operations of the Council, obviously the 10-year plan and the annual budget are the places where the Council determines how much debt is going to be required to fund the operations for the year based on the capital program that's approved as part of those processes. So that's about how much, really. And then there is the Treasury policy, which is again adopted by the Council, and that embraces a couple of policies that are required in the legislation, one of which is called the borrowing management policy. So there's a borrowing management policy and an investment policy that we wrap up into what we call the Treasury policy, and that's available, it's published on the website. In earlier days, it used to be formally part of the 10-year plan itself, but nowadays it stands alone because some of the original things that were required in that policy were taken out and are now required to be shown in the Council's financial strategy that is part of the 10-year plan, or the LTP. So this Treasury policy, it sets the way the debt portfolio is operated and managed, and includes policies about a range of things like interest rate and funding risk, the level of risk the Council is prepared to take, and what actions we take in managing the debt portfolio on your behalf to fit within that framework. So that policy discussion happens every 3 years or so when we update the policy, and it does so in the context of 10-year plan and the financial strategy that forms part of your 10-year plan. So as staff then, we delegated responsibility to manage the portfolio on behalf of the Council. It's quite a significant sum of money these days. It's getting up 200 million or so. So that's a significant responsibility. To assist us, we engage some external advisors that I meet with regularly to test what we should be doing to protect the Council and to live within the Council's risk policies that are set as part of that Treasury framework. We have to, as part of what we're doing in the finance and Treasury function, is we're trying to judge on a day-by-day, week-by-week, month-by-month basis exactly how much cash the Council needs to fund the operations from day to day. And as you'll be aware, when the reports you get back, that can be a difficult process because we have lots going on, lots of capital programs that are at various stages of work and the actual payment of the bills, we have to be able to pay those when they're due. So we operate a sort of a pool arrangement in terms of the total debt. It's not assigned specifically to a particular project, but we're forecasting what our requirements are. We're trying to raise money at the most cost-effective rates that we can, obviously, not to raise too far in advance of when money is required, but to have sufficient capacity to pay the bills when they are required. So the Council itself, obviously, in terms of this portfolio, in order to get the best rates that it can, it's decided to get a credit rating, and we have S&P Global, who are a credit rating agency, and they monitor everything that we do. They watch closely, and annually they review formally that rating. We have, as a Council, a very good rating at the moment that enables us to get prime borrowing rates that are offering for councils. And another way that we then obtain the best rates that are available is to make use of the agency that was set up, the Local Government Funding Agency. And the Council is both a shareholder and a guarantor of that agency. And that agency borrows on behalf of local government in New Zealand, and it's behind the Crown, the most significant entity that there is in the market providing funding. It's grown and is a very, very successful operation that runs a very, very lean ship on our behalf as local government. So we borrow from them almost exclusively these days in terms of our longer term funding, and we have arrangements, facilities with banks to cope with short-term peaks and troughs in our cash requirements. So we judge what's an appropriate level of facility to have at the banks. Some of them are standby facilities, some of the ones that we use like a revolving mortgage on a day-to-day basis. So this report then just shows what we've done during the first quarter. It's sometimes a little bit difficult because we use the term gross debt and net debt. The term gross debt, as I use it, means what the total external borrowings are of the council at any one point in time. And if I were to tell you today, the gross debt of the council as of today is 210.2 million, right as of this minute. 20 million of that debt is debt that we've raised in advance to refinance debt that's maturing next year. And that is part of our philosophy these days that underpins the work that we have through the credit agencies, because they want to make sure that you know that you've got the ability to actually raise the money when it's needed. So you can be raising money up to a year or so in advance of when it's actually required to refinance debt. The council, of course, at the moment, because of the capital requirements it's got going forward, is in a position where it's increasing its debt level every year. So we're in effect always refinancing debt that's maturing. We're not paying it off, if you like, but we are making provision in our budgets each year to, if you like, share the cost of that debt with the ratepayers over time for the life of the assets that we're using to fund it by having a debt repayment, a so-called debt repayment sum that's being contributed to by ratepayers each year. And so that amount we get from rates comes off the sum that we need to borrow to do the capital expenditure, and the net amount of that is what we actually borrow each year in terms of additional debt. So the other thing at the moment that comes off the gross debt, if we're thinking about the debt that relates specifically to the council, is a new thing that's happened in the last quarter, and that relates to the last topic we just had, and that's in relation to the airport. In July, the council, we raised $5 million, which we on-lent to the airport. And so that, in our books, is treated as a loan, increases our gross debt, but we've got an investment of $5 million in the airport company from that advance. So that's why in this report we talk about gross debt, the net debt, which is the debt less the sums that we've got invested to repay debt that's maturing at some point soon, less the debt that we've raised on behalf of the airport, means the debt really that relates to the council's day-to-day operations. So as of today, we've got about $185 million that is debt, net debt, that relates to the council's operations, and I expect that over coming months that will increase to fund the capital program that forms part of this year's operations. In terms of the market, obviously it's been a very volatile market over the last while, and interest rates, you don't need me to tell you this, are increasing quite significantly. And in the report I've just given a bit of a hint as to, from interest.co.nz, I copied a graph that they had showing what had happened to the 90-day bank bill rate, which is a very important indicator rate for the way our interest rates and our borrowings are set. Because the vast majority of the debt that we raise long-term, we raise as floating rate debt. And that means that every 90 days, depending upon the base, it's reset to whatever the current rate is. And the council then protects itself against interest rate movements by having these things that are called swaps. And in this report it talks about what swaps are and shows what they are. And they're taken out in order to try to limit the impact if interest rates rise. So a couple of years ago, well, over recent years, interest rates have been going down and down. So these swaps have been ones where we've been paying the bank. Effectively, what's now happening is that these swaps have value and the bank's paying us. So it's, for me, quite a nice trend to see the bank paying us for a change. And that means that whilst we might be paying, say, 5% for our underlying debt, because the bank's paying us in relation to the swap agreements, we've got an average interest rate that's lower than the 5% that the market's taking at the minute. So I guess I hope that that sort of outline gives you a bit of a sense of what the Treasury function involves and the way in which we manage it in order to try to place the council in the best position in accordance with the risk policies that the council has in place. And in this quarter, we've lived within all of the frameworks that the policies describe, apart from one very small one which relates to an investment which says that we have a little bit more than what the policy suggests we should have invested short term. And that investment is the one that we've got to retire the debt going forward. And we've got all that invested with one bank. And on reflection and discussions with our advisors, we believe that we've been very conservative in terms of the sum that we've said is at risk in terms of the investment with one bank, and that we'll look to increase that figure the next time that policy's reviewed. So gone a bit longer than I normally would, but hopefully that sets the scene for you.
Thank you, Steve. There's a lot to take in there. Thank you. All right, open it up for questions. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've been umming and ahhing about asking a question because, frankly, there's too much in this report, figures-wise, that I don't understand. It's beyond my sort of level of experience, so I will be abstaining from voting on this. But I wanted to ask a question anyway, perhaps, I hope my ignorance doesn't show too much, but you said here that we generally only put our loans on floating.
Yes.
Does the interest swap program preclude us from fixing our loans from a longer term, or can we continue to participate in the interest swap program and, for example, fix our loans for a longer term period?
Any of the loans that we've raised at the moment that are a floating rate loan will remain a floating rate loan throughout their term. So on page 109, for example, the loans that were in place as at the 30th September, they're listed there, and there are only 2 of those where you'll see that they're showing as fixed. There's $15 million in total of those where the interest rate is fixed. All the rest are floating. So interestingly and pleasingly, the ones that are fixed at very good interest rates, 1.12% and 1.36%. So in today's terms, they're exceptionally good. But each time we raise funds, we discuss with the advisors about whether we should be borrowing fixed or floating, and people have different perspectives about that, but we use our advisors and trust their advice, I guess, and take that advice as to what we do. And the basic philosophy is that most times we're borrowing at a floating rate, and if we feel we need to try to fix it in some way, we use the swap mechanism to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any further questions from councillors? No? All right. Look, we've got the Treasury report for 3 months ending the 30th of September 2022, and we are noting the performance of council's activity for the 3 months ending 30 September 2022. I'm quite happy to move that. Seconded by Deputy Mayor. Thank you. and I'm standing between you and a cup of tea, so I'm fine with, we'll go to the vote, please, if there's no further comments. I'll just make one comment before. And this is quite a lot to take in, and there's been a lot of figures there, and I acknowledge Councillor Wood's comments, and I'm sort of sense that everyone's looking at it and going, wow. So I would suggest that we do have a session, Steve, with the councillors, our full council and the management team, just to glean a little bit more about the overall position and what it's looking, what are the options and what's it looking like going forward, because it's a lot to take in for any councillor in this current form. But thank you for the report, and we will vote on it, receiving it. Thank you. That's passed 15 votes for, with 1 abstention. Very quickly, our last one is our council work schedule of the 16th of November 2022. It's on page 115. I'm quite happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And are there any matters arising from that? It'll be updated as of from today. And council, obviously, in 2 weeks' time. All right, we'll vote on that, please. And that has passed 16 votes for and none against. I'll now just also, Council resolves that we go into part 2 and public are excluded for the following parts of the meeting listed below. It's around the city transport review, and I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And no questions to that. We will vote, please. It's passed 16 votes for, none against. Right, we'll come back into the chamber at 3:30. We'll have a cup of tea. Thank you.